Well, welcome back to another episode of the Reforming Men podcast. Today it's just me and Matt Adams. We don't have a guest, but we have an article that we're going to be interacting with. Recently, an author named Helen Andrews, she's written a book entitled Boomers, the Men and Women Who Promised Freedom and Delivered Disaster. And in Compact Magazine, she's written an article entitled The Great Feminization. And so I've read this article 2 or 3 times now, and I told Matt, I sent it to him and I said, hey, we've got to read this article and interact about it in an episode. And the article by Helen can be summarized like this. Cancel culture is feminine. Female social preferences and habits negatively impact institutions and the workplace. Women are not competing on an even playing field with men. There's a thumb on the scale in favor of women. Men are being driven out of industries and fields by the feminization of these various industries and fields. And the window to solve this problem is rapidly closing. So let me just read the first two paragraphs of this article by Helen Andrews. She writes, in 2019, I read an article about Larry Summers and Harvard that changed the way I look at the world. The author, writing under the pseudonym J. Stone, argued that the day Larry Summers resigned as president of Harvard University marked a turning point in our culture. The entire woke era could be extrapolated from that moment, from the details of how Summers was canceled, and most of all, who did the canceling? Women. The basic facts of the Summers case were familiar to me. On January 14th, 2005, at a conference on diversifying the science and engineering workforce, Larry Summers gave a talk that was supposed to be off the record. In it, he said that female underrepresentation in hard sciences was partly due to different availability of aptitude at the high end, as well as taste differences between men and women, quote, not attributable to socialization. Some female professors in attendance were offended and sent his remarks to a reporter in defiance of the off-the-record rule. The ensuing scandal led to a no-confidence vote by the Harvard faculty and eventually Summers' resignation. So that gives us an idea of how, in Helen's mind, the idea behind this article began to take shape. She read another article 6 years ago, and that kind of led her down this path to consider how culture, society, mainly the workforce and academies and institutions have been feminized. So Matt, what takeaways do you have from this article? What can we learn as pastors, as men, and as the people of God?
Yeah, so Nate, I think it bears mention that Larry Summers is not just an obsolete, just a kind of a common man who became the president of an Ivy League school. I mean, we're talking about a former U.S. Treasury Secretary. He was known for his directness. He was known for his analytical style, his data-driven style, we might say. He was not, the prototypical political sensitive actor within the federal government. But that served him well as the Treasury Secretary. You want someone who is analytical, data-driven in that position, in that role. And after, he served in our federal government, he does become the president of Harvard. And in this, closed door speech, this academic conference, he's talking about, women in science and engineering roles, and he gives, possible explanations, right? Just possible explanations, these 3 hypotheses regarding, why we see more men in these sort of positions. And while there was some complaint about what he said, especially him saying that, women who are seeking to have families and seeking to bear children and seeking to raise their children, they have these responsibilities outside the workforce that we agree are good and fulfilling, but they just don't have the same time commitments that are required for STEM careers. While some people, especially the ladies in the conference, had issues with what he was saying, more of the issues, if you kind of go back into his resignation and a lot of the journalists and articles that were written after his resignation, it was about how he said it, right? And so one of the core themes that you find in Helen Andrews' article, this Great Feminization in Compact Magazine, is this whole system that has developed in our culture, in workplaces, even in the church. We can easily draw that line from kind of the managerial revolution in the workplace and policies and procedures and all these things to the way the church is governed and led. You
Mm-hmm.
have this huge movement about feelings, right? I think that was one of the things that grabbed my attention very quickly as she is writing through her thoughts on this subject. She gets into wokeness, she gets into cancel culture, she gets into all these demographic shifts and things like that. But one of the things that she really begins to hone in on is this transition from quote unquote, is it true, to quote unquote,
Yeah.
how did that make me feel?
Yeah. And
So
you can see this
yeah,
in paragraph 3 of the article. She says experts chimed in to declare that everything Summers had said about sex differences was within the scientific mainstream. These rational appeals had no effect on the mob hysteria. And in that same paragraph earlier, she cites Nancy Hopkins, who is a biologist at MIT. So if you're a biologist at MIT, you're supposed to be the cream of the crop. And here's how she responded to the comments that are scientific mainstream from Larry Summers. She said, she's quoted by Helen Andrews here, when he, meaning Summers, started talking about innate differences in aptitude between men and women, I just couldn't breathe because this kind of bias makes me physically ill. So let me get this straight. You're a MIT biologist, and someone making a statement which is corroborated and supported by the scientific mainstream makes you physically sick. That's how. So you're supposed to be. You're a biologist. You're in hard science. You're supposed to be rational and logical, just data driven. But someone's very data driven comment makes you feel so bad, even though he's not talking about you. You've made it. You're an MIT
that's
biologist.
right. You're
He's not talking
successful.
about
Yep.
you. You've arrived, but it makes you physically ill. This is, you know, I just it really is. It's feelings over facts. And I want to just pause and say, I think when we start talking about these things, I, most of our listeners probably aren't women, but just in case a woman ever actually stumbles across this podcast, I want you to understand that the reason that we're approaching this is not because we don't like women. Matt and I both love our wives very much. We've got 3 daughters between the two of us, and they are the apple of our eye. This is not a. I mean, I was shocked that a woman wrote this article.
Yep.
It
And
really
at the
is,
same time, very glad that
and
a
very
woman wrote
glad.
this
And you
article.
see her motivation at the very end. Because I'm kind of scratching my head, going, boy, this woman really is cutting off so many different career opportunities to write an article like this and to take some of the lines of argument that she's taken. But then you see it at the very end. She says, I'm the mother of sons
Yep.
who will never reach their full potential if they have to grow up in a feminized world. And so the reason that we care about this stuff is not because we're angry men who are upset about injustices against men. It's because we, as the fathers of both sons and daughters, we see the negative consequences that this will have for society, for both of them, for their future spouses, and for our future grandchildren.
Right.
So
Yeah.
please hear us out.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, and it needed to be made. But you think about the impacts on society, or the impacts on education, the church, the workplace. I mean, we could we could talk about all the spheres of life that we walk in, or our children will walk in, or even our grandchildren will one day walk in. If truth is evaluated primarily by emotional impact, not that truth is true, we are wading into very dangerous territory.
Mm-hmm.
Because truth, and there's a way that we speak truth, right? I mean, as pastors, there's a way in which we are to articulate what is true.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but truth does not always demand, um, for lack of better terms, truth doesn't always demand gentleness.
Mm-hmm.
We see the Lord and Savior Jesus speaking very vehemently against evil.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
see him, being gentle and teaching
Yeah.
truth, but we see him also very zealous for truth and willing to confront what is evil and what is a lie with
Yeah.
truth. And so, hard truths, or even truth in and of itself,
Yeah.
cannot be evaluated primarily by emotional impact or by your feelings,
Yep.
because there is a responsibility
Yeah.
to be truthful.
Yep.
As our God is true,
Mm-hmm.
therefore his people are required then,
Yeah.
um, to be a truth loving, a truth telling people,
That's right.
despite what one might feel about that truth, right? Um, and you know, and Helen gets into this. Helen Andrews gets into this, not in these particular words or specific words, but you know, our society, especially in the workplace, as she's kind of articulating things in the workplace, in a great deal in this article, you know, offense taken vetoes any sort of authority.
Mm-hmm.
So if your manager or your boss or your employer, uh, his authority can be shaken, his authority can be usurped,
Yeah.
simply because you are offended by
Yep.
his authority.
When you see that in one of the first two paragraphs, because he's off the record, it's a closed door faculty meeting, or no, it's not a closed door faculty meeting. It's a
closed door conference.
closed door conference. It's off the record, and it was female faculty members of Harvard that decided, nope, we don't care that it's off the record. We're going to defy that rule because we're offended. And it's interesting who ends up having to resign. It's not the female professors who are reviling their superior, their authority figure, and breaking the rule. It's the guy who said everything factually correct. He apologized, which he should have never apologized for it, but he apologized 3 or 4 different times, and every time he had to apologize, he had to lay it on thick. And that's what we need to understand, is that when a reviling woman is involved, or in this case reviling women, an apology is never enough. The moment that you apologize for something that you didn't do wrong, they will not be happy until you've basically literally given a pound of flesh. It's never enough. And so that's just one example from this article about how, the insubordination and the undermining and the cancel culture, seeps in and ends up, the wrong people end up leaving the organization. The wrong people end up leaving the room, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the, thinking about this authority, and I would love to hear what you think about this, Nate. One of the things that we've seen the rise of, in the workplace or in the church even, is conflict management, right?
Mm.
We've taken any sort of courage away, because courageousness is
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself to be reviled.
Yep.
And I mean, we could actually talk about just the fact that we need to be courageous about the faith, courageous about truth, courageous in the workplace, in the home, in society, all these things. But I mean, so management, and especially managing conflict,
Mm.
it's all done by, policies. It's all done by optics. It's all done
Yep.
by consensus.
Yep.
It's a process.
Yeah.
It's in instead of it being based on wisdom, instead of it being based on the situation in and of itself. I mean, so there's ways that we manage conflict in certain circumstances and
Yeah.
situations. Not a there's not a one fits all policy that can help us manage conflict.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, because of this, this rise in therapeutic ideologies and feelings and all these things, we've tried to manage conflict by these processes, by these policies, by the optics of what we're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been involved in conversations, and I mean, a little bit of insider baseball here, but we have been told on the floor of General Assembly, right? Gentlemen, you need to be reminded that our wives are watching this conversation, or the world is watching this conversation. How are we going to be perceived? What are the optics here
Hmm.
in this debate?
Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts about just that whole idea that therapeutic institutional norms have replaced managerial authority or pastoral authority, um, or denominational authority or anything like that.
Oh boy. Um, yeah, I think so. On the whole, the world is watching trope. I mean, the ninth commandment demands that we think not only about telling the truth, but we also think about um, upholding the reputation and good name of others and ourselves. And I think that last part is often forgotten. Um, that we do have a duty to uphold our own good reputation and good name. And so if someone is saying, "Hey, brother, the world is watching," and they mean that as a reminder and caution that we are to speak the truth in love and we're to speak the truth clearly and concisely so that we can properly represent ourselves out in the world. Okay, fine. That's all good. Um, but I think I'm reminded of a conversation that we uh, that I had with an author recently. I was asking him about his book, and why he went with the publisher that he went with, and he basically said, "Well, everybody else that I shopped it around to wanted me to basically remove any sort of real punch or teeth from the book. They wanted me to water it down." And the book that he wrote, not even that. It's not spicy. It's not a hot take. It's not. It's very historical, biblical, confessional, and yet it was just too. It was just too hard. It was too straightforward for publishers, and that grieves me. that a book that's not. It's not filled with rude language. It's not curt. It's not blunt. It's not unkind. It's just factual and biblical and confessional and straightforward. And yet there was this need to round off any edges, right? Because heaven forbid that the word of truth, the sword of the spirit, actually cut us, right? And so I think that's a way that the feminization of the culture and society has made its way into the church. In one author last year in a book that he published talked about this, that it's a type of sabotage in organizations where someone will come to you and say, "Hey, you weren't wrong, but why'd you have to say it that way?" It's tone policing. It's it's brought up in this article. Any sort of critique of women has to be buried in multiple layers of compliments. And I experienced this as a flag football coach in college. I coached a women's intramural flag football team, and I was pulled aside by two of the players, and they weren't wrong. They were trying to help me be more effective. And they said, "Hey, every time you give a constructive criticism, make sure that you positively reaffirm the player first." right? So they ran the wrong route. It's like, hey, you ran that route with great speed and enthusiasm, but you're supposed to run a slant, not an out,
Yep.
right? And just it's, you know what I mean. With dudes, we don't have to do that.
Nope. No,
It's like,
not at all.
yeah, it's like, hey man, you broke the
You,
completely wrong way.
yeah, you knucklehead. Yeah,
Yeah,
what are you
yeah,
doing? Yeah.
yeah. So it's we I understand that one of the disagreements that we're going to have with Helen Andrews in this article is that it's clear that she comes from like a secular evolutionary biology perspective. That comes out. I don't know if you picked up on this. That comes out in the way she talks about men and women developing group dynamics.
Yep.
And so for those of you that won't read the article, basically what Helen says is, men had to develop these particular approaches to social interaction with other men for the sake of war, defending the tribe, defending the country, defending the land, so on and so forth, making peace with warring tribes so that we can, not have endless bloodshed, so on and so forth. But women had to develop these social needs in order to deal with the scarcity of resources in the village, and so on and so forth. And so that's why their habits develop this way. Well, we would obviously disagree with that and say that men and women have different social habits because we're designed by God differently for different stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a chicken or egg issue.
Yeah. And while she gets to the differences between men and women, uh, the wrong way, not the biblical way, that we're just created differently as male and females. There is even what we might say a worldly distinction between men and women. And I think that is really something that has been watered down in our society as well, that we're just different beings, that men are not women and women are not men. And of course some of that distinction is being watered down because gender is fluid, right? You can decide that you are a woman because of the way you feel, or you're a man because of
Yeah.
the way you feel, things like
Yeah.
that. I mean, we're facing the consequences of just foolishness on a cultural level. But I do think that she's getting into something that pushes against the narrative that is often articulated in the workplace or in the society, that a woman can do anything a man can do. And we hear that in the church, right?
Yep.
Unordained women can do anything unordained men can do,
Yeah.
which is a total farce.
Thank you, Kathy
Um,
Keller, for popularizing that sentiment.
that's right. And so one of the things that she draws out, in the mechanisms of feminization is, female group dynamics, consensus, cooperation, compassion, conflict avoidance, an aversion to risk. All these things, while she doesn't get to the foundation of the issues in the proper way, all of these things are absolutely true. And
Yeah.
so what do we hear as men? You need to be more empathetic,
Yep.
right? Empathy is a big deal for the
Yeah.
way in which we talk about, understanding different people, understanding different,
Yeah.
uh, you know, men understanding women, whites understanding blacks. I mean, they say you have to have empathy, right?
Yep.
Um, and so, that kind of leads you into this whole idea of the woke culture, right? Because she's saying if it's empathy,
Mm-hmm.
if it's men having to bend to consensus and cooperation and compassion and conflict avoidance and risk aversion, then what the priority then is not to magnify the differences or even to recognize the distinctions between men and women, but prioritize cohesion, safety, emotional reasoning, group solidarity over, expressions of gender distinctions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, again, while she doesn't get there the same way we would as Bible believing Christians, she is understanding mechanisms and the symptoms and what this ultimately leads to.
Yeah.
This, we've mentioned cancel culture already.
Yeah. She
It
comes
leads
right
to
out.
cancel culture. It leads to wokeism.
Yeah. She comes
Um,
right out and says everything you think of as wokeness involves prioritizing the feminine over the masculine. And then several paragraphs later, she's kind of walking through group dynamics favoring consensus over cooperation, whereas men typically focus more on results. At one point she talks about how she cites a book called Warriors and Warriors: The Survival of the Sexes. It's by a psychology professor named Joyce Benenson. And she describes how in the modern psychology lab, this is Benenson. When I say she, it's another woman that's cited in the article. But she observed that a group of men given a task will jockey for talking time, they'll disagree loudly, and then they'll cheerfully relay a solution to the experimenter. They're given a task by the people running the experiment, and they'll work through it, and then they'll come to a solution. But a group of women, she says, given the same task, will politely inquire about one another's personal backgrounds and relationships, accompanied by much eye contact, smiling, and turn taking, and they'll pay little attention to the task that the experimenter presented. So it's all about it's about relationships, and it's about how we feel and how we're doing relationally. But it's not about results. It's not about actually doing the thing. So then you then translate that into various fields, and what are what are going to be the consequences? And she brings up one. This is one of my favorite lines. Like 3 paragraphs later, this is one of my favorite lines in the whole article. She says, "The field," meaning where this plays itself out, the field that frightens me the most is the law.
mm,
How many times have we seen some horrific in the last year? Have we seen some horrific act occur, some act of violence in our society? It's committed by some guy that's been arrested dozens of times, dozens upon dozens of times, and it's often a liberal or a female judge, or both, often, that lets them go, like gives them a slap on the hand, lets them out, and then that's when they then go and commit this great act of violence that leads to someone's death. This is the result of the feminization of the law. She
yep.
says all of us depend on a functioning legal system, and to be blunt, the rule of law will not survive the legal profession becoming majority female.
Yep.
I think she's completely right.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, some of the things that we've heard after one of these, one of these men who have committed, 30 plus crimes, and aggravated in nature crimes either, also. And when asked to defend their actions for not keeping them in prison, it's
Yeah.
you don't understand their upbringing, you don't understand their culture, you don't
Yep.
understand how they wrestle with
Yeah.
mental anguish, or you get all these excuses that
Yep.
actually work towards, well, have you ever put yourself in the shoes of the criminal,
Yep. Yep.
rather than being totally disgusted at watching a young woman be stabbed to death on a metro train. And so, I
Mm-hmm.
think that Helen Andrews gets to a really good place when she begins to talk about the risk of our institutions in adopting these feminine priorities. I
Yep.
mean, she doesn't just talk about the law, even though that's a significant institution at
Yeah.
risk. But she talks about academia. She
Yep.
talks about media. She says all of these institutions have shifted towards a feminine priority, a prioritization of feminism, and it's undermining everything that they ought to be about, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
you think about media, right? Truth is now evaluated by feelings,
Yep.
not by reason, but by feelings.
Yep.
So we're going to articulate on our media, on our news stations, in our print publications. We're not going to just simply print what is true. We're going to curb what is true,
Yep.
undermine what is true, so that we can make everyone, be validated in their
Yep.
feelings. Um, you know, Academics. I mean, we've seen this throughout the landscape of academics the past, handful of years, if not even more, in, being grossly offended by 2 + 2 = 4,
Yep.
you know, um, or, I mean, you take really any institution that has trended towards feminization, and it's undermined, truth, it's undermined reason, it's undermined wisdom, it's undermined debate, it's undermined merits and competition, risk taking, which is absolutely necessary in the business world.
Yeah.
Um, and all of those things that is undermining is, it is quickly showing its negative consequences, its negative impact on our civilization as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think she does a really good job at saying, and you've already read the concluding paragraph, I want my sons to be successful. I want my sons to reach their fullest potential. But in a society that is feminized, they absolutely can't. And the thing that we need to remember is, in a feminized society where men cannot be who God created them to be, courageous, responsible, risk-taking,
Yeah.
reasonable, wise, our daughters aren't going to
Yeah.
succeed either.
Yeah.
Um,
You look at matriarchal subcultures in America. They're not doing great. They're not doing great. And so then if you make the law feminized, and the law, the world of law is taken over by women, we then essentially end up with a matriarchal society from the law, from the judge's bench. I saw a video the other day of two politicians having a disagreement. I think they were either state legislators or city council. I can't remember exactly, but a man was introducing a bill, I believe, and a woman, of course, a liberal woman, chimed in and said, I'm just concerned. This bill is focusing so much on punishment for people that have committed crimes, and I just think we're not doing enough to think about the needs and think about the people that are in the position who have been convicted of these crimes. And the guy just responded. He said, "Okay, so in the last 18 months, these 6 juvenile delinquents have committed violent crimes, various crimes, over 170 combined. It's an average of 29 per perpetrator." And he said that's 170 plus victims in 18 months. And you're worried about these 6 people being punished for their 29 crimes in 18 months. Not every one of them committed 29, but that's the average, right? But that's apathy over rationality, or excuse me,
yep.
empathy over rationality. It focuses more on empathy for the violent criminals than it does focus on compassion and pity and justice for those that are innocent and have been harmed. And in a society like that, evil men are going to run wild, and women are just going to be steamrolled. And it's kind of like this political cartoon I saw many years ago. Someone had a noose that there's a person with a water, like a flower watering pot or whatever you call it, and they're watering a tree, and the base of the tree has a rope tied to it, not the base of the tree, but one of the branches, and then the rope leads to a noose that's around the person's neck. And they're basically watering the tree that's going to eventually grow up and be big enough and strong enough to actually destroy them. And that's what the Great Feminization is doing. Like the women that are behind pushing for the Great Feminization, they're going to end up being the primary victims of it. And that's why we care so much about this. And that's why men in the church should care so much about this, because this is first and foremost going to hurt our mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, granddaughters. It's inevitable. And she closes by saying, the window to solve this problem is rapidly closing. She
Yeah.
recognizes, even as a secular woman in our society, we have to turn this boat around, and we don't have a whole lot of time to turn it around.
Yeah. Yeah. We've undermined our civilization in such a way
Yep.
that the things that we
Mm.
have done to be empathetic, to promote these feminine priorities, is going to be irreversible at some point. And I think that I think about all this discussion in the terms of the fifth commandment and how it's articulated
Mm.
within the larger catechism, right? Of course, it's not just our earthly mothers and fathers, but the fifth commandment is helping us to realize that there's a hierarchy within our society and within our relationships, and feminization has led to wokeism, and woke culture critiques any sort of hierarchy in and of itself. Um, but it, our reaction against hierarchy, what the fifth commandment is actually articulating is that our reaction against any sort of hierarchy within civilization or the home or the church or in the family is actually sinful, because
Mm-hmm.
God has created his created order with a hierarchy that is distinguishable.
Yeah.
Woman is given to man.
Yeah.
Man and woman then are to go and have children and to raise them. It's building off of the hierarchy of the family in and of itself, that then pours into governments and societies and churches and everything else that is good in God's creation. And so, one of the things that we have to be very careful about is just this the negation of any sort of hierarchy within our order, within our spheres,
Mm-hmm.
is actually sinful. It's prideful.
Yep.
It's injustice. Um, but we, we've, in our attempt to say that there is no hierarchy, we have, quote unquote, tried to correct it in ways that are even more sinful. Because we've said we're not recognizing hierarchy, and so we've reordered authority, or we have taught our sons not to be risk takers, or we've taught our
Mm-hmm.
sons that you don't have a responsibility as a male, and we've also taught our employees that employers don't have the right to tell you what to do or how to do your job. Um,
Right.
and and so, I mean, this is not just a sociological conversation that we're having. This is highly theological.
Yeah.
Um,
She
and
says
and
she says at one point in the article, no civilization in human history has ever experimented with letting women control so many vital institutions of our society, from political parties to universities to our largest businesses. And I thought you could just translate that to say, no civilization in human history has ever experimented with such great and astounding levels of sin. because we've just cast off the natural order of things. We've said, we're going to defy the laws of nature and just see how it goes for us. We'll
yep,
roll the dice and see how it works.
and one of the things that I made a comment earlier about how I was super thankful that a woman wrote this, just simply because women would read it. But
Mm.
I'm super thankful that she has come out and she has said very outrightly that going against the the natural revelation of who
Mm-hmm.
God is and what He desires for His creation, or how He desires for His creation to function, has not served us well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, we are suffering because of the ways in which we have pushed back against God's created design. and the
Yep.
ways that we have sinned against him by what is revealed to us in nature itself.
Yeah, and she even picks up on that. She says the problem is that female modes of interaction are not well suited to accomplishing the goals of many major institutions. She recognizes that there's a male nature and there's a female nature, and you've got these academies and institutions, these businesses, and so on and so forth. And the male design, which she believes developed over time, and we believe was instilled in us by God, but she's at least getting, hey, the male design is what will help these institutions reach their goals, and yet they're doing everything they possibly can. They're cutting off their nose to spite their face. They're doing everything they possibly can, it seems, to run contrary to their own institutional objectives.
One of the things that, I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but I mean, we're talking a lot about natural revelation and natural order and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And even some guys in our circles will start saying, well, nature in and of itself does not give us the ability to define, something like masculinity or femininity, however you say that. I'm getting tongue tied at this point.
You're from South Carolina. We
I'm from
understand.
South Carolina, man. This is just the Dylan terminology coming out. But no, I mean, they'll say there's not enough there. That we can't base our arguments for gender roles and gender distinctions and what a man ought to be and all these things from just natural revelation. But I want to point out something in 1 Corinthians 16:13, where Paul tells the church at Corinth, act like men,
Mm-hmm.
right? Does he sit there and go, and you know what a man is because of, the law says this, and God said this through the prophet Isaiah, and Jeremiah said this, and you know these writings well. And no, he just says, act like men, and he moves on. So how do they know what a man is? How do they know how a man should act?
Yeah.
And I think that Paul is basing that phrasing off of natural revelation.
Yeah.
I think that he is saying, you know what a man is, and you know what a man ought to be, and
Well,
you know
he
what a man
deliberately
ought to
says
do.
he deliberately says earlier in the book that, hey, doesn't, in another context, he says, doesn't even nature teach you this?
Yes,
Paul believes that nature can teach us stuff.
absolutely.
And I think that comes out in articles like these, where you have someone not arguing from a biblical worldview at all. I mean, she's coming from like an evolutionary biology background, it seems, in terms of how the genders and sexuality is formed. But she's able to see we have different natures.
Yep.
We're designed for different stuff. And her words would be more like we're developed for different stuff. But she rightly lands, even though she gets there incorrectly, she rightly is able to land where she ought to on this, because nature teaches us. Nature shows us things.
Nate. Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I think it would be, constructive for our listeners. We've been navigating, Helen Andrews diagnostics on what's wrong, right? And what we're seeing is these negative impacts. But I think maybe we should propose some ways in which Christian men, and Christians just in general, but especially Christian men, ought to engage this, right? I mean, because it's not just simply resisting feminization.
Right.
I think that in my proposal, at least, of how to engage in this, is I think that we need to resurrect true virtue. I think we need to be zealous for the truth. I think that we need to be courageous. We need to be just. And so we push back in the ways in which we promote those things. That we're not, we're gonna be truthful people despite your feelings. We're going to manage conflict with wisdom and prudence and reasoning, and we're going to seek truth in disagreement. We're not going to promote quarrelsomeness, but we're going to find, truthful resolution. We're going to have a backbone. We're going to be clear. We're going to be fatherly, if you will, right? Strength under control for the good of others is what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And so I think that really helping people understand kind of how to push back against this is helpful as well. I mean,
Yeah.
what would you say? How would you say
Yeah.
are good ways to push back against these
Great
things?
question. I just said in a sermon yesterday, I said, remember, grace perfects nature. It restores and perfects nature. It doesn't abolish it. It doesn't push against it. It doesn't hack it into pieces. And so I think the solution for men is not to become more feminine to navigate the world, to navigate life. It's to become, to have a greater piety, a greater godly virtue as men, right? It's not to act less like men, it's to act more like godly men. And so you've already nailed one down. It's we don't engage in wokeness in our conflict resolution. We can be kind and we can be compassionate and we can be tender and we can also be rational. We can have, there's a book that I want to read. The subtitle of it is The Case for Rational Compassion. The title of the book is Against Empathy, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go into full on feminine woke, or in our case, effeminate, because we're men, effeminate woke empathy. You can steer into a true biblical compassion as we're dealing with people. Here's a great example. Okay. I've seen this in the church. I've seen this in the PCA. I've seen this in my own personal life. There's a great book that helps us with this. It's Putting Your Past in its Place by Stephen Veers. I had to read it for our class at RTS Charlotte. So here's what happens, Matt. Someone is sinned against. They have bad things happen to them. They get tough providence that come their way, and they can respond in one of two ways. They can respond righteously or unrighteously, right? And the way that so often, and we particularly do this with women, we let women off the hook. We are hesitant to hold women accountable to the same degree that we'll hold men accountable. But this touches both genders, both sexes. We then look at someone who's had all these bad providences roll their way, and we say to them, well, because of what you've been through, we're not going to address your sin. Or if somebody tries to come in from the side door and address their sin, and someone goes, whoa, hold on. You don't understand their story. You don't understand what they've been through. You don't understand how hard life has been. And it's like, okay, by all means, tell me the story. Tell me how hard their life has been. I'm happy to hear it. But now that we've heard that story, that does not give somebody a free pass. It helps us understand and show compassion, but it doesn't give them a free pass to continue to sin. Right?
Yep.
This leads to, I want people to understand this. If we do that, we actually create intergenerational problems. Because if that person ever has to repent, they are now modeling for their children and grandchildren. This is a normal way to respond. And if you've been sinned against, you get a free pass. So then that grandparent is sinning against the child and the grandchild because of their sin. No one's ever checked them. And now their kids and grandkids are being intergenerationally traumatized and sinned against. So then they've got this baggage, and now they get to respond and say, well, you don't understand my story. Right?
Yep.
So this just perpetuates.
Right. I mean, I think it's Rosaria Butterfield, right, that says that empathy is untethered to truth. Because, I mean, her whole point is, I mean, while it's fitting to know people's story, while it's fitting to know their upbringings and their struggles and all these things, to show compassion,
Yeah.
it does not change what is true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the one of the things that we see, I think, often in society now is this whole idea of not getting married And it stems from, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons
Yep.
why these things happen. But I mean, one of the things that you might see is, well, my mom and dad had a terrible marriage. They ended up divorced and they hate each other. And, you know, my grandfather was, uh, a drunk and mismanaged money, and his grandfather was abusive. And you go, well,
Yeah.
because, you know, his father was abusive, he became immature with finances and mismanaged finances, and they had a hard marriage. And because they had a hard family life, my dad was, just a terrible person, and he didn't treat my mom well, and they ended up getting divorced, and they hate each other. Therefore, I'm not going to be married, and I'm going to live with my girlfriend, and we're going to have babies, and we're going to be sexually promiscuous and all these things. And when you go to this
Mm-hmm.
couple who now been visiting your church and want to join, and you go, well, listen, there's a problem. You're
Yeah.
living in sin. They
Yeah.
go, wait, you don't know my story. The truth of sexual immorality does not
Yeah.
change because generationally you've had
That's right.
poor, you know, poor pictures of what marriage ought to be. Um,
Yeah.
and there's a ton of illustrations we can use, but
Yep.
can I be compassionate to that couple? Can I be compassionate to that woman who just does not want to put herself in a bad marriage? Well,
Yeah.
sure, I can. But that doesn't change what is true.
Right.
Um, and uh, and I think that leads, me to another just point of application on how to
Mm.
push back on this is, this whole risk taking or risk avoidance that has become so prominent. Um, just tackle it head on. Um,
Yep.
don't smooth over issues. Don't avoid hard conversations. Don't let loud emotional reactions set the direction. Uh, be reasonable, be compassionate, be prudent, but also do your duty as a man.
Yeah.
Um, let's handle the issues. Let's handle the disagreements. Let's have the hard conversations. Let's, you know, call what evil is evil, and let's call what what truth is true. Um, and and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
Um, I as elders in a church, we're called to practice church discipline, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
whole reason we do church discipline is to reclaim the center, to promote the purity of the church, and to glorify the Lord. Yes, and amen to all those things.
Yeah.
Is church discipline easy? No. Um, when you go to confront someone regarding their sin, are they going to like it? No. Um, and yet at the very same time, we cannot avoid that, and we can't smooth over it either. We've just got to be clear and concise and tackle it head on. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be easy. You're going to dread it, and yet we know that it's best for the glory of God, the purity of the church, and the reclaiming of the sinner. Right, and so you take that same mentality into the workplace or into the home or into the society, tackling it head on and promoting truth will, yes, one, glorify the Lord, because we're Christians, we're called to do that. But it will work for the benefit of that person you're having that hard conversation with, even though they don't like it, and it will work for the betterment of that sphere that you have influence in.
Yeah.
Your workplace will be better, society will be better, your home will be better, your marriage
Yeah.
will be better. If you'll just go ahead and stop smoothing over the issues and avoiding
Yep.
hard conversations and risk, and just go do it.
Yeah. I think another application here, what can we do is, and I think more godly men need to enter the law. I mean, you think about how many Supreme Court justices are there? 9. And how many of them are godly male Protestants? The answer is 0. That's sad. So I would encourage men to get into law, to be good and faithful judges, to carry out justice from the bench, start a business. If we can't change these institutions, we need to raise up counter institutions.
Yep.
Different universities, different colleges. If we see, there are some colleges and institutions and seminaries that perhaps the tide could be turned. Perhaps they could be reformed, and they can be reshaped, and feminization can be walked backwards in those institutions. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. And so there might need to be new institutions raised up. Another one that be maybe kind of a wild application would be, hey, maybe if you're a man, go into HR, and if you're already in human resources, just decide to be, just decide that you're not going to be the you're not going to carry water for the feminization of the marketplace. She says at one point in this article that a male boss could run the business like it's a frat house, could turn the office culture into a frat house, and a female coworker could then sue the company for it. But a male employee could never sue the company because his female boss turned it into a Montessori kindergarten.
Yep.
Right. And so HR departments maybe shouldn't exist in the same way that they exist today. And so perhaps an application for some man out there is to say, hey, I'm in human resources, or thinking about it. Hey, maybe you just go be a different kind of HR guy at a company, and maybe it won't go well for you. Maybe you'll get fired because you're not upholding the wokeness super well. But if you have the ability in your company or in your institution to make a change, she describes how there's a thumb on the scale in favor of women, and if you've got a position of power or could gain a position of power in order to level the playing field, do so. Do that. Those are some practice. Those aren't easy. I think those are very practical but challenging ways to push back against the Great Feminization. And but the most obvious one, I think, is that as you're raising daughters in your home, you need to do a good job of teaching them what God has designed them for. And that's not to go be a girl boss who's out there running a Fortune 500 company, or being the president of Harvard. I mean, just think about what Harvard did. So they fired Larry Summers in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, whenever he got fired. Well, 20 years later, they had a female president who then had to step down because she could not answer what a woman is, in front of Congress. And then it turned, people looked into her, and it turns out she plagiarized her PhD dissertation. She had to step down. And she then got to turn around and describe the whole series of events as this like really well-laid trap to get her out of her position. Right. So you've got Larry Summers 20 years before apologizing all over himself, and it's never good enough before he eventually is kicked out. But she gets obviously caught for plagiarism. It's not even close, and she can't really apologize for it. Instead, it's somebody else's problem. They laid this trap for me. I've been harmed. I'm the victim here.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and to piggyback off of that, if your daughter is going to go and pursue an education, and they're going to go pursue a career, one, teach them that being a college professor is not going to fulfill them if they're going to neglect their duties of being a mother and a wife. They're going to be empty. But also teach them that they should want to earn their place in their career. Mm-hmm. That a merit-based workplace or a merit-based society is a good thing. We want the best of the best. Being our college professors and our doctors and our lawyers and things like that. And so, I mean, you might be listening to all this, right? And you might say, man, none of this sounds easy, right? Starting a new institution, starting a new business, pushing against the grain in the workplace. None of this sounds easy,
Yeah.
and it's not. But we're
Yeah,
not
that's right.
called to a life of comfortability, and we're not called to live a life where offense defines truth either. Life is defined by faithfulness in our glorifying of the Lord. Um, and so, go do the hard thing, guys.
Hmm.
And we're talking about raising daughters. We also need to think about raising our sons, right?
Yeah.
We need to raise our sons to be courageous and self-controlled. We need to teach our sons the responsibility that they have as men in the home and in the church and in the society and in our marriages.
Yeah.
Um, and we need to help them develop godly masculine traits.
Yeah. You think about this. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but as we're raising our children, one of our responsibilities, and I think this has long been forgotten in the Western Church, and at least in Protestantism, but we have a biblical responsibility to help our children marry well. So you just think about this: you do all this hard work raising your kids, and then you send them off to college, and you're completely disconnected from the dating process, and then your daughter brings home a guy that's interested in her, but he's not going to really be able to provide for her to where she can stay home and fulfill her desires and her calling as a wife and mother. So she's going to have to go be in the workforce, even though she doesn't really desire to. And she's going to help probably, if you've raised her to be competent, then she's now perpetuating the great feminization. Now, on the other hand, you'll say you raise your sons and you don't help them think through these things, how to choose a godly wife. And then they go out and they find that they fall in love with the first girl that bats their eyes at him and likes his truck or whatever he's driving. And now he's hitched his wagon to a woman who's deeply steeped in feminism, even if it's subtle. And she wants to reject her responsibilities at home and go out and pursue being a part of the great feminization, even if she wouldn't put it in those terms, even if it's not malicious. She's not been properly oriented to hierarchy and how God has created the world. So, you know, we've got all these very difficult, enter the law, pursue greatness in that field, start a business, try to shift the culture where you are. These are all very difficult, but the simple one is to start at home and to properly teach both your sons and your daughters how God has beautifully and majestically wired us as men and women to be and to serve for the greater good of our church, of our community, of our society. And then as they grow up into maturity, make sure that they are marrying well so that all of your hard work doesn't go to waste. Right? What a tragedy that would be, right? To watch your sons and your daughters go off, and then now they're raising a family that is just going to participate even more in the
Yep.
great feminization.
Yep. I get really bothered when parents at the church, will excuse their children's actions because they're quote unquote, well, they're out of the house and in college now,
Yep.
or they're adults now, but you're still footing all their bills. It's one of those things that parenting is an active role for their
Yeah.
in their entire formation. And we
Yep.
need to do that diligently.
One of the things I'm so thankful for about my father-in-law who passed away earlier this year is that my wife has said to me, even after my older sister and I were out of the house, we were paying our own bills, we were running our own businesses, we were off dad's dole, we were off his payroll, but there were times where he would just lay it down for us and say, we're not doing this as a family. This is not how we live. This is not how we act. We have a family name. We have a family ethic, and this is outside of it. And
Yep.
I think men should do that, even if their sons and daughters are out of the house. They should be able to pick up their phone and say to their sons and daughters, "Hey, I love you.
And
You're,
we raised you better.
we don't do this.
Yeah.
You still bear my name. You're still my child. You still represent this family. You represent Christ, and this is not how we live. And I mean, this has a great impact beyond just our own families. I mean, this is how she closes the article. She says, "I am," and then she stops and says, "We all are dependent on institutions like the legal system, scientific research, and democratic politics that support the American way of life, and we will all suffer if they cease to perform the tasks that they were designed to." And, in that sentence, I would add the church and the family.
Mm-hmm.
When the institution
sure.
of the family and the institution of the church cease to operate the way that they're designed to do, we will all suffer. So this is a matter of great importance, and we have to deal with it starting in the home, starting in the church. We're experiencing this. Matt, I don't know what your opinion is. I think I could guess, but I want to speak for you. We're experiencing this in the PCA. The Great
100%.
Feminization has absolutely landed in our backyard, and a lot of people aren't aware of it. They just think this is normal. They think the PCA as a whole is pro-male headship, pro-patriarchal. Not really. It's very matrilineal. It's a lot of guys in a lot of different churches trying to operate in a way to appease the social needs and desires of women.
Yep.
And matrilineal societies and subcultures are only a couple slippery steps away from just full-on matriarchy.
Yep.
That's all I got to say about that.
Yep. No, we definitely are fighting this battle at the denominational level, and I think that this summer's General Assembly will it will tell the tale on whether or not we're going to let some of these things stand. And so listeners, be praying for the PCA. But we have a lot of men controlled by their women. We have a lot of effeminate men. And that's a hard truth that we need to wrestle with. We have a lot of men that want to smooth things over and make everybody feel seen and validated. And they're doing it at the expense of distorting what God has designed. And it could lead to significant trouble in the future.
That's right. Amen. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Just as a reminder, if you want to get some Reforming Men swag before Christmas, contact me on Twitter or on Facebook. We've got some tumblers and we've got some hats. And when you buy a tumbler and or a hat from us, it helps support our work as a podcast, and we greatly appreciate it. I'm actually going to leave here in just a minute and go to the United States Postal Service and send out some tumblers. So thank you for those of you that have helped support the podcast, and we hope that many more of you will consider doing so. But that's it for today. I'm Pastor Nate Zander signing off for myself and for Matt, the Coach Adams, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all.